It's time to get nerdy, y'all.
A little bit of gaming history for you.
Something relevant in gaming and discuss our opinions on it.
Should we kick it out of here, or should we kick-start it?
This is the part where you, the listeners, try to stump the hosts.
I'm not a lawyer, I just play one on a podcast. Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to a special little Two Nerds short. Something interesting happened since we recorded last, and that is that the Stop Killing Games crew had a bit of an announcement, an open letter. Basically, there is going to be a meeting with several industry folk, well, actually, really just with one industry folk that we know of, ahead of the votes for the Stop Killing Games initiative in European Parliament. They have asked everybody to share this, and as you know, Stop Killing Games has been a big subject of conversation, both cheers and concerns amongst our community, amongst all gamers. But at the end of the day, I believe there are almost zero actual gamers who are against the proposition that if you paid money for it, you should be able to keep it. It's something that both gamers and farmers go hand in hand with. Just ask your nearby farmer what they think about what John Deere is doing, as well as all of us we understand for the planned obsolescence and the right to repair. These are all interconnected ideas and issues. However, because they specifically asked for us to all share information about this, I figured, hey, what else have I got going on a Wednesday morning? So I'm going to go ahead and share that with you. On June 3rd, 2026, Yves Guillemot, CEO of Ubisoft, is listed among the industry participants at, quote, Games in Europe, built here, played globally, end quote. An invitation-only European Union Video Game Industry and Digital Policy Dialogue, hosted in Brussels by Video Games Europe and the EGDF. That is the opening image of this moment. Ubisoft at the table with its CEO at the helm, in the room with senior European Commission officials shortly before the Commission is expected to answer Stop Killing Games. Ubisoft shut down the crew, one of the cases that helped turn the destruction of online-dependent paid video games into an international consumer issue and helped drive this movement's first successful petition. Ubisoft is now facing legal action over that shutdown, including from the French consumer organization UFC Quoi Choisir. Sorry for the bad French pronunciation. Has faced legal action in California over the same issue, and is also under scrutiny by French and Australian consumer authorities. The timing is impossible to ignore. The event takes place 13 days before the European Commission is expected to answer a citizens' initiative backed by more than 1 million verified supporters. The program sits directly on the same political ground which Stop Killing Games is being debated. The forthcoming Digital Fairness Act, consumer choice, business models, investment, innovation, competitiveness, and regulatory future of the games in Europe. The listed Commission participants include Executive Vice President Hanna Verkuren, Deputy Director General René Nicolet of the DG CNECT, Isabelle Perillon, Director for the Consumer Policy at DG JUST and DG GROW. These are the Commission actors and services responsible for the field in which this issue will be assessed, including officials we have already met with repeatedly while explaining the actual demand. Less than 2 weeks before the Commission is expected to answer the initiative, Video Games Europe, the lobby organization that has already misrepresented the initiative, is hosting an invitation-only event on consumer choice, business models, digital policy, and the future of games in Europe with senior Commission officials and the CEO of Ubisoft in the room. Misdirection. The same pattern appeared in Europe before it appeared in California. A short reminder, Video Game Europe's position paper begins by saying that it is not clear what Stop Killing Games seeks to achieve. It then supplies its own version, a requirement to provide online services, quote, for as long as the consumer wants them, or a very specific form of end-of-life plan based on private servers. And that was not the demand. The official initiative asks for games sold or licensed to consumers to remain in a functional state, and for publishers not to remotely disable them before providing reasonable means for continued operation. Video Games Europe replaces that claim with indefinite online services and mandatory private servers. It then built the rest of its paper around that replacement. It argues against every server support indefinitely, every permanent use, every releasing of game code or server binaries, every intellectual property risk, player safety risk, private service competition, and third-party licensing problems. But those are not the proposal. This is the core misrepresentation. Video Games Europe takes a flexible demand for responsible and sustainable and respectful end-of-life game design and turns it into an unreasonable demand for infinite support and server obligations, and then declares that version disproportionate, unsafe, and legally impossible. That is not engaging with the narrative. That is twisting it before answering it, and that is misdirection. California. This becomes even harder to excuse when the timelines are compared. In California, this same issue was brought before its legislature in the form of Assembly Bill 1921. AB 1921 would prohibit publishers from disabling consumer copies of video games without providing them some means to continue running them, or else entitle the consumer to a full refund. California did not spend years debating whether this problem was real. AB 1921 entered the legislative debate in February of 2026, and lawmakers moved directly into the work a democratic process is supposed to do, defining the issue, testing the lobby claims against the text, debating remedies, exemptions, and enforcement, and asking how a workable route could be written. Within that short period, the legislative process was already able to separate the bill from ESA's framing. The Entertainment Software Association, ESA, told lawmakers that AB 1921 rests on a false premise that consumers own digital games with permanent access. Its floor alert framed the bill around ownership, impossible mandates, third-party licenses, copyright, higher costs, fewer games, less innovation. But the Assembly Committee's analysis did not accept that framing. It recorded ESA's claim that the bill assumes an, quote, unrestricted ownership interest, end quote, and clarified that AB 21 does not contain language suggesting that an ownership interest in the underlying copyrighted work. Instead, the bill is scoped to ordinary use. The committee analysis described the practical problem in the same terms Assemblymember Chris Ward has raised. When a live service video game stops being supported, the game can become inoperable for users who purchased a license, with the exception of continued access. The proposed remedy is notice, followed by either a playable version or refund once the relevant services cease. That is what a serious process looks like. The lobby made its argument, staff tested it against the text, and lawmakers moved to the real questions of ordinary use, notice, remedies, exemptions, and enforcement. California's process communicates something simple. The issue is real enough to legislate, and the correct response is to work on a solution. Europe. Europe has had far more time. We first met with the Commission before the signature collection had even finished. Since then, we have had at least 6 further official meetings. The actual demand has been explained repeatedly by the community, by lawyers, by developers, and by elected representatives. Ordinary use is not ownership of intellectual property. Responsible end-of-life planning is not eternal server support. Reasonable means for continued function is not a demand for source code, and expired commercial distribution rights are not the same thing as a right to remotely disable access for existing purchases. The Commission has had more time than California's staff, direct meetings with us, legal distinctions explained by lawyers we brought in, and repeated clarification that the lobby's version of the proposal is not the proposal. That is why the comparison is so serious. California can move from recognizing the problem to scrutinizing concrete legislative language within months, while in Europe, after months of direct engagement, parts of the Commission still appear to circle around whether the issue requires more clarification. California lawmakers, Republicans and Democrats alike, are debating legal text in the way a democratic process should. In Europe, elected representatives have had to correct the Commission's framing in public. Parliament. MEP Gregorvia of the Greens/EFA and the Private Party put that concern directly to the Commission. In her words, Mr. Abamonte, speaking on behalf of the Commission, had repeated, quote, "the arguments of a handful of the largest publishers almost word for word," end quote, at the last 3 public hearings. Arguments that, quote, "do not reflect how games actually work," end quote, and, quote, "do not reflect what these citizens are asking for," end quote. Her conclusion captured the core issue. Quote, "the only thing standing between a paid-for game and its destruction is not technology, it is a business decision," end quote. MEP Wolken, for S&D, made the same failure concrete by pointing to the commercial incentive behind shutdowns. He noticed that the practice is especially widespread when a successor is ready to replace the game. He called it completely unfair and told the Commission that recognizing the problem without offering a solution was not enough. Quote, "you say you see the problem, but you do not offer any solution." His diagnosis became, quote, "we continue to treat games as digital services rather than as products," end quote. This is exactly the legislative question that California was already working through. Marion Walsman of the EPP reached the same practical conclusion from the Commission president's own political family when she called for the Commission to move beyond voluntary industry measures and put forward a legislative proposal. That is the actual contrast. In California, lobby claims are being tested against the bill and lawmakers are working through solutions. In Europe, the Commission has had more time, more meetings, and more direct explanations, yet members of parliament from different political groups are still having to say that the issue is real, that the lobby's framing does not match the demand, and that recognition without a proposal is not enough. It is right that the Commission engages with stakeholders. It is necessary that it hears from everyone involved. Players, developers, lawyers, consumer advocates, preservationists, and industry representatives. What is not acceptable is treating a handful of large companies and lobby organizations as if they are the industry, while they use that position to defend the status quo and claim credit for driving the medium forward. At some point, the discussion has to move from more clarification to the actual issue. Digital Fairness Act. That is deeply disappointing. In light of the upcoming response to the European Citizens Initiative, we had hoped the Commission would be ready to start working on a solution, including one that could fit into the upcoming Digital Fairness Act package. That work is already moving elsewhere. Members of the European Parliament and governments represented in the Council are already engaging with us on proposals to address this issue through the Digital Fairness Act. This makes the Commission's continued search for more clarification even harder to understand. The political question is already moving from whether the problem exists to how it should be solved. It is time to work on solutions, name the actual issues, discuss the real technical and legal questions, stop accepting mischaracterization of the demand. Institutional failure. The deeper problem is not simply that the Entertainment Software Association or Video Games Europe argue aggressively. Aggressive lobbying is already a democratic problem when it misrepresents the public demand, but it is also how the system often works. Lobby groups argue for their members. The institutional problem begins when the lobby's version of the issue becomes the version repeated by the institution responsible for answering the public. That is why members of European Parliament have had to intervene publicly. The question is no longer simply whether Video Games Europe or the Entertainment Software Association are misrepresenting the demands. They are. The question is why one democratic process filters that misrepresentation out for the most part, while another allows it to reach the point where elected representatives have to correct their own executives. Why is the lobby's version being corrected in California but echoed in Brussels? Why does a claim that can be identified as outside the bill in one legislature survive long enough in Europe that Parliament has to remind the Commission what the initiative actually asks for? That is the disappointment we are facing. It delays solutions that should already be discussed, and it makes the process more difficult than it needs to be, while risking further fragmentation of the rules. Mandate. The oppositional views being pushed forth by the lobby not only do not unilaterally represent those of the industry, they may not even represent the majority views of their own members. Tim Sweeney, CEO of Epic Games Inc., stated, quote, "Epic Games hasn't lobbied or opined on the law," quote, in response to Video Game Europe's public opposition to the initiative. German publisher and developer BeamNG, a member of the VGE, stated, quote, "VGE didn't ask BeamNG concerning their response to the initiative," end quote, and to the best of their knowledge, quote, "there wasn't a vote on this too. We do not agree with their statement. That is not how a representative group should be behaving," end quote. Conclusion. When collectively millions of consumers, many publishers and developers, and a majority of EU Parliament, and now the state of California, all recognize that there is a problem that needs solving, it is sensible to do the work toward finding a solution. The Stop Killing Games movement will have an additional statement and a video detailing its future plans closer to the EU Commission making its decision on how to proceed on June 16th. Thank you so much for listening. I'm sure I got most everybody's names wrong, and my apologies. However, it's hard not to read something like this and just feel the frustration at how California, the United States, something that, let's be clear, most of us had completely given up on this problem being addressed in the United States whatsoever. It's very disappointing for them to be looking back at the state of California, at that assembly bill, and ask, why couldn't they do that? And it is true. If I may engage in just the slightest bit of analysis, I do think that perhaps the very fact that the European Citizens Initiative, being such a big deal, drawing so much attention, a lot of people didn't really know what was going on with the assembly bill in California until, well, much later on down the road. Frankly, I think maybe the Citizens Initiative in Europe, drawing all the attention, might have wound up saving us over here in California from that bill being taken as seriously as it should have been by the software industry. I can't help but hear and feel bad about this frustration, but to some extent, I salute you because you may very well have saved games in the United States by trying to save games in Europe. Hopefully, we can return the favor. Thanks for listening to this short episode. We hope to catch you on the next full episode of Two Nerds in a Pod. You can come out to the live record Mondays, 7 p.m. Pacific, 9 p.m. Central, at the Twitch channel. That's twitch.tv/2nerdsinapod. Be excellent to each other and keep it nerdy. Bye.